Hello students, welcome to Utparun. In the last class, we have discussed about biological classification, a few terms related to the biological classification. It was a preliminary introduction, you can say, to the topic. Now, in this class, we will be discussing in details about the rest of the heads that we have under the subunit, biological classification. Now, this subunit is part of the unit diversity of living organisms, which is part of your syllabus. Now, in the last video, I've discussed about the terms systematics, taxonomy, and the difference between the two mainly. And I've also discussed a little bit about the branches of taxonomy. Now, here in this video, we will be continuing with the rest of the unit. Here, first, we have the types of taxonomy. So, last video, it was branches of taxonomy. Please do not get confused. So, the types of taxonomy are alpha taxonomy, beta taxonomy, and omega taxonomy. So it can be also represented by the symbols. This is alpha, this is beta, and this is omega. Okay. So do not get confused if you see the symbolic representation in the question paper. So alpha taxonomy considers only morphology. That means it considers the morphological characteristics of the specimens. Next, in case of beta taxonomy, it considers genetics, anatomy, physiology, and other aspects in addition to the morphology. So that is beta taxonomy. It is not only morphology, so you can say that it is a more elaborate form of taxonomy. Next, we have omega taxonomy, which includes the phylogenetic relationships. Now, if you remember in the last lecture, I have discussed what phylogeny is. Phylogenetic means the evolutionary relationship between two organisms or the organisms of the group. So, phylogenetic relationship means in case of omega taxonomy, we are considering the evolutionary relationships of the organism. Next, we have the components of taxonomy. In the last lecture, if you remember, I used a table to demonstrate the differences between taxonomy and systematics. And at the end of the taxonomy head, I have merely mentioned rather, these four components of taxonomy. So the components of taxonomy are characterization, identification, classification, and nomenclature. So let us discuss a bit about these components. First is the characterization. What is characterization? You can take the word literally. Characterization means enlisting the characters. So examination of the characteristics of newly discovered organism. Now, as a student, when you are working with the specimen, obviously you're using up a pre-discovered specimen only. But as a scientist also, but for you, it's a new experience, right? So you feel like a scientist when you're observing the specimen. What do? You look at the specimen, you try to find out the prominent observable characters. Like say for example, if you're working with a plant, you first look at the inflorescence, whether if it's present or not. That inflorescence means the type of flower arrangement. Then you look at the leaf arrangement, that is phyllotaxy, isn't it? Sometimes we look, sometimes no, we check the venation also of the leaves. So all these things we do, we note down the characters first. So that is the step of characterization. The next step we have is identification. So what is identification? The process of determining the type of organism. Now when you look at an organism, you first determine the type. It's an obvious nature we have. We try to identify the organism. Like it is a fish, it is a dog, it's a plant, it's an animal, it's a virus, it's a bacteria. So this is identification. You are identifying the organism. And next, we have the component classification. That is, classification in biology refers to the systematic arrangement of living organisms into hierarchical groups. There are different groups into which we segregate different organisms based on shared characteristics, evolutionary relationships, and common ancestry. So, a particular animal in a group, when two animals are put together in a group, rather, you can say that they share some common characteristics, they probably share an ancestry, and they have some similarity in the evolutionary development. So, that is the classification term meaning. So the primary goal of classification is to organize the vast diversity of life on Earth. So why are we classifying? We are classifying to make the study of organisms, the study of life form easier. Because as I mentioned, according to NCRT, there are 1.7 to 1.8 million organisms living on the earth. So studying them individually is impossible. So that is why we are classifying. We are putting them into groups and we study the groups. And it also helps, it also makes the newer organisms, the study of newer organisms easier. Why? You already know the groups, unless it's a very radical development, it's an extremely new organism, it's an extremely group of organisms that we have discovered. Other than that, we always work with the pre-existing ones. Either it's a protist or it's a fungus or it's a plant or it's an animal, these groups are fixed. So classifying them, classifying the new organism is basically putting the organism into a group. So now it is easier. This classification has divided the organisms into prominent groups and we are just finding the new organisms and placing them into the respective groups. So it's easier nowadays. It's easier since we have already classified it. But there were several efforts invested in the process of classification, and we are thankful to our scientists for that. Now, without further delay, let us stick to the syllabus and quickly take a note of the need of classification. First is the organization of diversity. There is so much diversity out there, we need to organize them in order to study them better. So that is the first need, primary need, organization of diversity. Next, we have facilitation of identification. It makes the identification easier. Understanding of relationships. When we are placing two organisms in a particular group, obviously we are placing them on the basis of some relationship. It can be reproductive, it can be evolutionary, it can be morphological, anything. Prediction of characteristics. We are able to predict the characteristics. We already know certain groups, where we already know certain characteristics of all the groups. So when you look at the organism, you are characterizing them, right? So if you already have a prior knowledge of the standard characters that are there, you can already be 80% sure that a particular organism is from a particular genera or species. Okay, so that is prediction of characteristics. Next, fundamental concepts of biology education. See, classification is fundamental. Whether you are pursuing a degree in botany, whether you are pursuing a degree in zoology, whether you are studying any other branch of biology, you will always have to deal with the topic classification. That is the primary knowledge of biology that you're going to get. And that is why this topic is part of your school biology syllabus, so that you develop the fundamentals by the time you reach the higher education. Inherently linked to evolutionary biology. So evolutionary biology, evolution is also taken into consideration. So the need for classification is that also. So that is about taxonomy and components of taxonomy. Now we will be discussing the next head, that is nomenclature. So what is nomenclature, students? Nomenclature is the branch of science that provides distinct and proper names to the organism. So the word nomenclature means naming of organisms. Now there are two types of nomenclatures. One is binomial nomenclature, another is trinomial nomenclature. So what is binomial nomenclature? Bi means we know two. So there are two parts to the name of the organism. Say for example, my name is Shomprita. My full name is Shomprita Shaha. So there are two parts. I have a name and I have a surname. So similarly, scientific names of organisms also have two parts, genus and species, generic epithet or specific epithet. Take note of some examples, students. We have Acacia nilotica, Mangifera indica. Mangifera indica, all of you know, it's the scientific name of mango. Now, trinomial nomenclature is genus, species, and the third part of the name is there, variety and subvarieties. So, trinomial nomenclature, the names include three parts, genus, species, and variety or subvariety. For example, we have Acacia nilotica. So, this is genus. this is species, and this is subspecies or variety. So now you have to remember one thing. See, for us human beings, does all of us have middle name? No. Some of us are having middle names, but it's not a very constant thing to find. It's not a very common thing. Usually, a person is supposed to have a first name and a surname, but having a middle name, it's not found in all the cultures. So here also same thing, trinomial nomenclature is only applicable to those organisms which have a variety or subvariety, subspecies. Okay, like I don't have a middle name, so I have two names. So I'm an organism who is having a binomial nomenclature, if you put it like that. So for trinomial nomenclature, for someone having a middle name, it's like a person having a middle name and a person not having a middle name. So binomial nomenclature and trinomial nomenclature are both there. Trinomial nomenclature includes a bit more details about the organism. That's it. Next, coming to the codes of nomenclature. Now, these abbreviations are very important and they are sometimes misleading. Now, we all know ICBN is the International Code of Botanical Nomenclature. This you will always get confused with the third one, International Code of Nomenclature of Bacteria. So ICBN and ICNB, don't forget that. Next, we have the abbreviation for International Code of Zoological Nomenclature, that is ICZN or ZN. Next, ICVCN, International Code of Viral Classification and Nomenclature. And lastly, International Code of Nomenclature for Cultivated Plants. So these codes, they have the rules of naming the respective organisms. It's not like every organism is named in the same way. Yeah, the basic fundamentals of nomenclature are same, which we will be discussing soon. The basic rules are same, but still, from organism to organism, like we have groups, we have botany, we have zoology, isn't it? So that certain rules are specific for the plants, for the animals, for the bacteria, like that. Okay. So based on the fields, there are some unique codes which are there, which are followed for the nomenclature. Next, we have binomial nomenclature. Let's focus on that since it's a universal thing. So binomial nomenclature, the first work on binomial nomenclature was done by Gaspard Bauhin. Now his work was part of his book, Pinax Theatri Botanici. So this is the book he worked on, and it was published in the year 1623 probably, tentative date. So the first work was done by Gaspard Bauhin, and students, we hail Carolus Linnaeus as the father of taxonomy. His work on binomial nomenclature is hailed the ultimate, the most prominent part. But Gaspard Bauhin, he laid the fundamentals. See, this is how science works. Huh? One scientist who discovers a certain thing, later on in the future, several scientists work on that theory to improve it. Okay, so we will be focusing on Carolus Linnaeus. Just for information, you can take down the name of Gaspard Bauhin. Okay. So Carolus Linnaeus, there are two books for which you have to remember, and also the year of publication: Systema Naturae and Species Plantarum. Okay, and there is another information which are placed over here. See, the 10th edition of Systema Naturae on 1758, which was published on 1758, contained details on binomial nomenclature. So it's the 10th edition of Systema Naturae, not the first one. And you have to remember the year 1758. Now coming back to the cream of the discussion, that is rules of binomial nomenclature. So binomial nomenclature means the name should have two parts. So follow the rule, the first rule. The entire two-part name must be written in italics or underlined when handwritten. So what does this mean? There are two parts of the name. Suppose Mangifera indica. Mangifera indica. So there are two parts of the name. The first part is Mangifera. The first part is Mangifera, and the second part is Indica. So a scientific name must have two parts, and it should, if it is handwritten, it should be underlined, and it should be underlined separately. The genus and species should be underlined separately. This first part is called generic epithet, and the second part is called species epithet. All right. The genus name is always written first. The genus name, that is this one, is always written first, and the genus name must be capitalized. The first letter should be in capital. The specific epithet should never be capitalized. The first letter should never be in capital. The name or the name or abbreviated name of the scientist describing the species for the first time should be written after the binomial. That is, after first you write the genus, then you write the species, and after that we put the name of the scientist who has discovered it for the first time. To avoid confusion, the same binomial name should not be assigned to two different species. So that is why even if a particular, say for example, tiger and lion, Panthera tigris and Panthera leo. So they are having the common genus name, but the species name is different. So you cannot say that the two organisms have the exact same name. Clear? That is all about the rules of binomial nomenclature. Now, why are we following the rules to name them? We could have named them anything. Like we call it, we use different local names for different organisms, right? Say, for example, in Hindi, we call it aam. In Bengali also, we call it aam. But in English, we call it mango. But the scientific community calls it Mangifera indica. So what is the point of having a scientific name? Everybody understands what mango is, but why are we using a scientific name? So there are some advantages of the naming system, and that is why we are using this naming system to name the different organisms. So the first advantage is the scientific names are same all over the world. Now, I've just now said it. In India, in Hindi, we call it aam, but someone from the UK will, or someone who is having the first language is English, will call it mango, right? So the scientific name will be Mangifera indica for India and Mangifera indica for some other country also. For UK also, it will be Mangifera indica. So the local name changes, but the scientific name is universal. It does not changes with the country. Next, they are definite and universally accepted. Just now I have said it. An incorrect name can be corrected easily. So it's a universal name. So if some other name that is newly assigned and it is incorrect, we can quickly figure out the error and correct it. A newly discovered plants or animals can be named easily. We already have one name for one organism. So if there is a repetition, we will be quickly able to identify it. And since we already have the list of names, the newly discovered plants and animals can be named easily. We are assigning a new name to it. Obviously, it's not random. We observe the characteristics, right? We observe the characteristics, we put them into several hierarchical levels. I'll be discussing taxons and taxa in the next lecture. So there you will understand that the naming is not random. We observe the characters also. And the last point is the most crucial point. It is derived from Latin language, which is a dead language. Now, what is the benefit of having dead language? Of using a dead language? It is not used on day-to-day basis. So it is not exposed to any form of change. The languages that we use are constantly changing. But since Latin is a dead language, it is not changed. It is a constant thing. So that's all about the type of the nomenclature, the binomial nomenclature. Now let us take a few questions to check your understanding. So just now I've discussed the rules of the nomenclature. So can you identify which of the following is the correct scientific name? So work with me. First one is Panthera tigris. The rule said the first letter of the genus should be in capital, but this is in small. So hence, and another flaw is there. Uh, the names are not underlined. The names are not in italics. So when it is in print form, it should be in italics. And when it is handwritten, it should be underlined separately. But this is wrong. Next, we have Panthera tigris. Here, the first letter of the specific epithet is in capital. So it is wrong. Next, Panthera tigris. This is correct, but it has been underlined. If you notice over here, it has been underlined in continuation. And another thing, when in print, when you are typing the name, it should never be underlined. It should be in italics. So the correct one is Panthera tigris. The first letter is in capital. The first letter of the species is in small letters, and the name is in italics. Is written in italics. So the correct answer will be option D. Next question. Which of the following is not a type of taxonomy? So in the previous lecture, I have discussed about the branches of taxonomy. So do not get confused with the branches and types. So first one is alpha taxonomy. Yes, that is the branch of taxonomy which only takes into consideration the morphology. So this is a branch of taxonomy. Beta taxonomy is a type of taxonomy. Chemotaxonomy, it's a branch of taxonomy, not a type. Omega taxonomy is a type of taxonomy. So our answer will be chemotaxonomy, which is a branch of taxonomy, not a type of taxonomy. So that's all for today, students. In the next lecture, I'll be discussing about the different taxons that we have, the hierarchy of classification, all those things, little bit that we have left. The major portion we have covered, the little bit of hierarchy and the levels of taxon, like kingdom, phylum, or division, those levels that we have of classification, we will be discussing in the next lecture. So that's all for today, students. Thank you.